don't get to be in the union environment as much as I used to, because I actually probably lived, walked, talked, slept, doing trade union work. So when I come back, I get really excited. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do, but I can't thank you enough.
I forgot about your video. Do you want me to introduce your video?
Okay. I'm not hard to get along with.
Sorry for that. So we do have a little video to play for Dr. Jones. So on a une petite vidéo à montrer pour Dr. Jones. Puis pour les francophones dans la salle, un autre point que j'ai oublié de vous mentionner, on va avoir plusieurs illustrations qui vont démontrer la carrière de Dr. Jones, mais on s'excuse, ils sont disponibles seulement en anglais, puisque ce sont des revues de presse principalement.
My name is Lynn Jones. I was born in Toronto, Nova Scotia.
Lynn Jones is one of 10 children raised in a family of leaders.
I come from a long line of African Nova Scotians.
Lynn was the first woman of color to be a vice president of the Canadian Labour Congress.
Lynn Jones was wronged by the party 27 years ago when the NDP set out to celebrate their 100th female candidate. The party had prepared the event expecting one woman to be the 100th, but the day before, Jones won her nomination.
Everything was set up for somebody else, so they opted not to change.
There's always change, and you always need to look at the good changes that took place. But then again, I somehow think they should have moved along at a faster pace.
Reparations have not been a prime concern voiced by the federal candidates, but they are of great concern and importance to African Canadians.
You've listened, you've heard. Hopefully you've learned something through your listening that will move you into action.
Wow! Thank you so much. No one's ever done anything like that before. And it takes me back in time to quite some time ago. So thank you so much. I've already asked me, without even seeing it, if I'll be able to get a copy. And I'll look forward to take $5, he said. He charges for everything. But anyway, as I was starting out to say thank you for the introduction, that it's always exciting when I come back into the trade union environment. And I can't come back without talking about how I landed in the environment. So I'm sure all of you have your story. So I have my story too. My eyes are going to be blinking because there's something that's happening with my eyes, but don't worry about it. I'll make it through. For today, it's going to be more like a fireside chat that we're going to have. And I would like, right off the bat, is there any topic or any area in particular, having had a bit of an introduction to me, that you would like for me to cover? Is there anything in particular? Don't be shy. Does anybody have anything? Imposters? My gosh, you're going deep. Okay. You'll have to explain to me imposter syndrome. You'll have to explain to me when we get there exactly unpack imposter, because I have my feelings about what happened. In fact, I might even cover that without using the terminology. But I certainly have experience with women. Okay, is there anything anybody else that wants to make sure that I cover? Is that?
Could you discuss the intersectionality of women leaders versus women of color versus women with disabilities?
Okay.
People who present as
Good topic.
gender other than women?
Got it. Intersectionality. Got it. Okay. Anybody else? Because there's no sense in me sitting up here running my mouth and nobody's interested in what I'm saying.
The barriers that you still face now, even though you've shattered glass ceilings.
Okay. Okay, we'll take two more, and then that'll be enough for me to last 2 hours that they've given me. Is there any more? Okay, then we'll get started. There's a bit of this in the video. Is there anybody here that's from Nova Scotia? Put your hands up. Well, there's a couple of people, but it's quite interesting. Just because they're from Nova Scotia doesn't mean that they know everything. So they're nodding their head. I always like to place, especially people that aren't here, aren't from here, because a lot of people don't realize it. So as it talked about in the video, that I'm what's known as an African Canadian from Nova Scotia. And because we consider ourselves a distinct people in the history of Canada, and I'll talk about that, we've actually taken the terminology further to say that we are Indigenous African Nova Scotians. So we're still African Canadians, but because of our history, it felt it was necessary to really unpack that Nova Scotia aspect. So you may say, isn't that a divide? Talk about intersectionality. Isn't that a divide and conquer kind of attitude? Not at all. Because most of the people in this country, they come to this country, come from other places and what have you, and don't understand at all the history of the country and never, in fact, we ourselves weren't introduced to our own history because we didn't have it in the school system. It got erased and lost along the way. But African people in Nova Scotia were the first Black people in the country. We were the very first, and we've been here since the beginning, 1604. The first person arrived in Nova Scotia, 1604. So there's a long history. I can still remember, up until the very late 60s, imagine this, Black people from Nova Scotia were the largest population of people of color in the country, not in Nova Scotia, in the whole country, until the great immigration initiatives that took place in the late 60s, when we had more people that arrived from the Caribbean, from Africa, from different places. And now, of course, we're not the largest, because you'll find the largest number of people in the Toronto, in the Ontario area. But at one time, we were the largest population of African people in the country. So that just gives you an idea of why there's a different settlement or history of what happens here. So you might say, well, how did you live? How did you make it? I'm not going to get into the history because I do talks too around what more of the history, so we won't have time to get in, but there were various influx of African people that came to Nova Scotia for various reasons. And even though the province of Nova Scotia didn't like to claim it, it's coming more nowadays. People came as we had a whole history of enslavement, same as everywhere else in the country, but we tried to hide it. That was in Nova Scotia. We also have people that came free. We have the refugees. We have, most of you would have heard of the Loyalists. There were also Black Loyalists. We helped in many ways to build the economy, build this area of Nova Scotia. One of the things I really point out, because it's so close to you, is the Citadel Hill that is very famous as a fortress looking over Halifax. Anybody been there yet, to Citadel Hill? See, you've been there. Did you know that in terms of the building of those fortresses, that many Black people were bought at that time from Jamaica, which would be often the Jamaican Maroons, to be cheap labor or at sometimes no cost to build the parts of that Citadel Hill. We didn't even know it ourselves. growing up. It's through this later history. I'm going to jump because I just want you to know that. And I often say to people of color, or black people, even people of color, who are more recent immigrants, and people get this whole thing about, why don't you go back where you came from, or go back home, or like they just got here. But what they need to learn is to claim their history. And our history is their history. It's you that needs to go back. We've been here since 1604. If anybody needs to go back. But we have a tendency not to claim that long-term history because we don't know it. And we think just what happens in Upper Canada or further is the whole history of the country. And it's not. I'm going to jump a little bit to how I grew up. And I grew up, as did most people, black people, in Nova Scotia. In my town is called the town of Truro, which is an hour's drive from Halifax, Truro, Nova Scotia. Most people in Nova Scotia all come from, they're maybe in Halifax, but their roots are in communities around the province. And most all the areas where they come from are on the edges of major centers. For example, although I'm from Truro, we lived on the edge of town, and it was more rural kind of setting on the edge because we weren't allowed to live because of the racism in the town. So you have these pockets everywhere you go. It was a black community on the edge. And the black communities developed, people say, how do you know each other so well and what have you? Well, in this area, and some of you, I know if your original roots from the Caribbean or whatever, is we can tell often people by facial features. Oh, you must be from Windsor. Or, oh, what's your last name? Oh, your last name is Upshaw. Oh, that's a Windsor name. You must be from Windsor. My person that helps me with the attendance service, he's where he comes from, and the last name's there. They'll say, oh, you must be from Africville. I can tell by the last name where the original roots of those families come from. So they often say, and I'll jump to union work a little bit in the sense that when I first started to do national union work, I was devastated. I wanted to go back home. I couldn't believe when I got to Ottawa and started working with different groups and moved across the country. And sometimes people could get in heated broils. I mean, fight, and what have you. And I didn't understand it because we didn't have that kind of situation at home. Yeah, did we always get along? No, but there's a difference, is that we were all connected, all kind of related along the line. So you can't fight with somebody real bad today and then go to a baby shower where you're all related so the way you engage with each other is quite different from if you're in an area where people don't really know each other. Everybody's coming in, they're immigrating, right? And if you fight with that person today, it doesn't matter, because you'll find somebody else to bond with tomorrow and kiss them goodbye, right? So that was a real problem for me, moving to the national level. I'm going to jump again, because I was saying to your president, I can talk for 10 hours, it's not a problem. Because there's so much details that are important in the work that you do. During that time, despite the racism of the day that I grew up under, just to give you an idea, when I grew up, which is not that long ago, in my first years of school, we went to the town, which is a rich town with all things considered. The premier of the province, the Stanfields, came from Truro, several well-known families, and we all went to the same school. So in my town, there weren't segregated schools, although there were around the province in different areas. Yet, did we have the same quality of education? No, because teachers might not pay attention to you, not encourage you, do these kinds of things. But when I went to school, for example, we had separate washrooms, for example. Black kids went to had to go to one washroom, Aboriginal and, black kids and Aboriginal, white kids went to another washroom. We weren't allowed to mix. White kids were allowed to use our washroom, which they didn't care to. I don't know why, because ours was cleaner. But, but we weren't allowed to go into their washrooms. In the town, there were things such as different establishment. I can still remember clear as day, where First Nations people, Aboriginal people, because often we lived close together and interacted because we were the outcast of the society, where they would stand outside the door or sit outside the door and ask somebody to go in the store to get them something because they were not allowed, because of the racism, to go in the store to buy. And that was my time. So it's not that that long ago. But for some reason or other, I got to move fast here. For some reason or other, I was very blessed to come from a family that they didn't know it because those terminologies weren't used in those days. Was very much a social justice family that fought for rights, human rights, any kind of rights that were, and it wasn't easy. But in that, my mom, and I go to the collection because he asked me to talk about the collection. My mom used to save articles of the newspaper or magazines that related to the Black community because we were rarely ever in the newspaper. So it was a big thing. And often those articles sat on the dining room table. It was piled up sky high. And I loved the dining room table because it was so exciting, even as a little girl, to read about us on this table. And I tell the story of when I was about 8 years old, and my picture was in the paper. And it happened that because I was in a music festival, and I was so excited because now my picture would get to go on the dining room table. And rather than other articles pile up on it, I would sneak around when they started to come on and pull mine back up to the top. So I was always at the top of the table. The table got cleared on Saturday night in time for church on Sunday. Another story. But that began my collection at 8 years old because I learned, well, my mom often was doing articles too that she was interested in, and I asked if I could collect what I was interested in. And she said, well, of course. So my first entry into my collection was me. And then it became what I was interested in my school things and what have you. And it was usually related to race because we were so close as communities fighting for justice between the First Nations community and the Black community. A lot of my collection carries on about different those communities. That collection went on for over 50 years. I collected from the time I was for over 50 years. When I first started, they were scrapbooks, and then it got out of control because I didn't have time to work with it. But wherever I went, the material went with me. I had neat ways of putting it in boxes and putting beautiful cloth over top of the boxes so you wouldn't know it was there. And I felt at different times I thought I'd put it together. In the end, it was, okay, when I retire, I'll put it together. So I retired, and still it didn't happen. So then I had ended up, and I won't get into that, opening up these multitude of boxes and what have you, and saying, I got to do something with this. And it took a year. A friend of mine, her children had moved out, and we put it where downstairs in her house, opened up all the boxes I couldn't believe, and that collection ends up to be, and we've still got stuff in my house, I haven't got there yet, 20,000 articles that are a part of the collection, and it grew from local to global and what have you. I want to back up a little bit on the trade union aspect. How'd you get involved in the trade union movement, Lynn? Because it just seemed to fit with social justice. And my brother was so excited when I had got the job. I worked with, then it was Manpower, which then came Canada Employment and Immigration and what have you. And he was so excited, oh gosh, you'll get to join a union. We never had the opportunity. And I'm like, what's a union? But he seemed to be excited about it. So I get in the workplace and I realize that there's all these injustices that are taking place and nobody's addressing it. But it was almost like the Secret Service. Somebody mentioned there's meetings monthly after work. Well, what are those? Those are the union meetings. Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be there. So that's how I ended up. And I couldn't believe there were these people behind the scenes, you know, challenging, but they were too quiet. They were in these little meetings. So anyway, I started attending the union meetings, and I usually was more active. In school, I had protested at my school when we didn't have a music room and a gym, and we won that. Had a walkout of the whole school. When I was in high school, I was the president of the student council there. So here I am with this union, and they're going to, they don't have enough people, so they're going to go into receivership. And I thought, oh gosh, maybe I need to contribute more, and I'll run, maybe for secretary or something. I don't know how this thing functions. And so I decided I'd run for secretary. And my black friend in the workplace, I go to her, I say, come on, you run for shop steward or something. And because we can't let this thing go, we got to let it go. Can't let it go. When the other people in the union found out there was this people of color that were going to run and perhaps take over the union, they changed their mind and decided that they would keep their positions and run. Now, up to that point, I was just, cooler. I just thought to myself, you don't know who you're messing with here. And I'm changing tactics. So I decided I'm running for president. Knew nothing. Knew absolutely nothing. And I'm going to run for president. So I go around in the workplace. I get enough people the most people ever out to a meeting. And lo and behold, that's how I became president of the local, and my friend became the shop steward in that local, and that's how I started out my union, my union activity. And one of our big things was, then I had to get trained. I had to have shop steward training and all this different training. I'm doing this, getting this training. At one point, I do it's called Leadership Development course. You still have that? Leadership, where it's leaders. So I'm doing that. It has breaks in between. I go back into the workplace. The members and the staff are all upset because the manager there is handpicking who's going to rise up in the office, who's going to get the job. I thought, okay, here's my chance. I said, okay, come out to the meeting. Come out, we're going to just write down, brainstorm, anything up on the board. I can still remember writing. What do you think is the problem in the workplace? And we wrote them all down. I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'll go with the management to see if we can correct them, which I did. The management didn't correct them. I said, we're going to have a personal strike in this workplace. And all the members chipped in, and we went on a work slowdown. And we all went on the work, slow down in the, because it was so miserable in there. And long story short, is that we won the fight, got rid of the manager, the people that were in positions that they had no right to be in were put back in their original positions. And it was just, that was part of my union development course, because one of the requirements was that you find an activity to do when you go, but it just popped up for me. I didn't have to look for it. It was just there, so we did that. Jump again. I'm always jumping because I gotta get to this collection. We got some slides, so we have to have time for them. But it was, I first became national vice president for women in Canada, the Employment and Immigration Union for the Atlantic region. So my whatever was women in the Atlantic region. Did a lot of work in the area of women's rights and what have you. How I became national vice president, again, you don't know how you're going to end up in a place. The person that was in the position was no longer going to go in the position. I said, oh, let me get some experience. I'll run. It was in Montreal. I can still remember. You don't forget these things. We're in Montreal, and there's another woman that's running who's not a person of color. We get in Montreal, and in the middle of the night, the woman went around and put a note under everybody's door at the convention it was, where we would get elected. And in the note, it said, pick somebody that can truly represent the majority of people in our union, because there's not many people of color. There's white people and able-bodied people in this union. So you need to select me to run, to win this position. Once again, it was like, oh my gosh, I was just running for experience. But now that just gives you the initiative to say, I'm going to win this. I didn't plan on doing this. And that was how we ended up on the vote. We ended up that it went for 3 votes. Can you imagine this, Mr. President? 3, and we were even for 3, and they couldn't move the vote. So we took a break, went in the washroom, and there was another woman. I said, somebody's got to move, and she was from Newfoundland. I said, I still remember. She later became a big whatever in the PSAC. I said, please, could you vote for me? Like, you know my work and what have you. She said, I won't vote for you because I should vote for somebody else, but what I will do is I'll stay in the bathroom. And that's how I won my first. She didn't come out of the bathroom. So that's how I made it through. I'm going to jump to my first, because you need to know these things. It's not a smooth ride. But yet I often say the unions are the best of times and the worst of times. I wouldn't trade it for all the money in the world. But yet was there racism? Most definitely. Was there discrimination against every group in the world? There most certainly was, including women. I need to talk about the women. You put something here about women. So I get to the national level, and I'm working with other national vice presidents for women from across the country. We go into my first caucus of women, and so I don't even remember what we made a decision on, but they decided these men were just taken over, and we took a position, and we'd go back to the main meeting, and the women would stick together, and we would win the vote at the national meeting, the overall national meeting. So remember, I'd never been before. I go out, and when I get to the national meeting, now I get to hear the men's side of the story too. And in hearing the men's side of the story, I thought, oh, there's more to this story than I knew about. I only had the women's side of the story. So I say to the women, like, now that I have all the information, I'm moving ship, like I'm voting the other way. Well, those women, what they did to me, what they put on me, I was crucified, absolutely crucified, because I shifted positions. But what I didn't know, I wouldn't do it in the same way later. You need to know, I would not have done that. But I don't know the rules of the game. And I don't know that you don't do that to begin with. And you talk to your caucus first and say, okay, here's the information we got. What do you think about that? Because I'm thinking they've got another position there. But I didn't know to do that. I just was going by what they said. The women that later said, don't you know they lie? And the whole bit. So it took me a bit of a time to get back to be able to work with the women, which were all white, mostly able-bodied, in the union because of what I did. But I learned I wouldn't do it again. It's not that I wouldn't change my vote, but I would make sure that we talked about it and caucused about it and what have you. Later on, there's so much. When I started, there was no human rights committees or we had an equal opportunity committee. It was only for women and not people of color, or only white women was the equal opportunities committee. When I first got there, because I was on the executive, I got in there, I said, what kind of committee is this? And we've got to get more people in here. And trying to move that equal opportunity committee. And that was the PSAC committee, and it was through those efforts that we were able to change to get persons with disability. Forgive me if I don't use the right terminology. At that time, it was Aboriginal, but I don't think you use that terminology. Could somebody correct me? I can't see. Indigenous, yes, thank you so much, and I do apologize for not using the correct, that was what it was in our day. Indigenous, and that's how other groups became a part of that committee. I want to say, even with our union, Canada Employment and Immigration Union, there was no human rights committees or anything like that. And my first national executive meeting, I didn't tell you about that. It's all written. In fact, there's a book being written as we speak. When I went to my first national executive meeting, it was a conference call. Never been on a conference call in my life. And so it was so neat. I was in my house in Truro, in Halifax at that time, and I'm on this conference call. And I won't give you all the details, but the president's chairing, and one of the people felt that they weren't being acknowledged, or he had missed over them. And he said, what do you think I am? And used the N-word from the Atlantic, and that's what was said on my first national executive meeting. So I'm waiting for somebody to correct this. Nobody, they just move on. And remember, I've never been there before. I've never been around these. I come back and say, aren't you going to do something? Did you hear what he said? He said yes to the guy and says, don't do it again, and moves on. And I come back, I said, that's not enough. Make a long story short, that meeting wasn't going to take place until I got some commitments out of the president at the time. And he allowed me to address the in-person national executive meeting over my issues. By then, there's a new guy from Toronto that's on the committee, a person of color, and he kept complaining about me. I was doing the work, and he kept saying, Lynn, you didn't do this, and you didn't say that. And it took me a while to figure out, you're not putting anything on the table, but you can complain about everything I put on the table. So in the end, we ended up becoming really good friends, and we developed a system. Any cops in the room, or CMP cops, or anybody like that? We had a good good cop, bad cop system that nobody knew about. And how it worked, because I have more of a soft kind of way. He just yells and screams, and people would get upset. So we planned in advance for the meeting, and I said, okay, I'll go in and introduce that we want a human rights committee. And I said, when I finish that, because they're not going to give it to me, when I finish, you move in. And he would move in and, what the heck is going on here? What? You're not. And he would go off his rocker. And the people didn't know what to do with him. Okay, relax. Lynn, what is it that you, and then it was easier to deal with me than it was to deal with him. And that's how we got the first Human Rights Committee for the Canada employment. And in the development, because you have, I don't want to miss what you had here, and intersectionality has always been an issue that is always, I think, going to be there. It's not going to move. It's how to end up working together to not be afraid to be honest with how you do things or how you develop. For example, although I was fighting because there weren't spaces for us at the table, it ended up, I had to deal with the fact, for example, that with the white women, they weren't getting what they wanted either. But we were able to work together, believe it or not. And always they got what they wanted first, but that's just the way it works. But when I would put something on the table, they'd come and help me. Thank you. They would come and help me, and I would go gather my community. Okay, I got a group of people that are going to help us move this resolution or whatever, and that's how we ended up working together. This was also a time when we were able to, there was also the rifts between the different groups, because persons with disability were left on the outskirts. They weren't getting their issue, and they weren't building. We had the Indigenous people who were doing the same kind of thing. But what we found was very effective was when we had groups such as this that were not afraid to get together, but also allow your own, we called it a room of their own, your own room of your own. You need a room of your own where the different groups can go into their room and come up with the concerns and issue, and then figure out together how you're going to help move each other's issues forward, because otherwise it can't work. At the same time, when they talk about a hierarchy of concerns, there are groups that have had different impacts, and it's okay. It's okay if how they've been impacted has been harder or more profound than the other. You need to learn to recognize it and not be afraid of it. But it doesn't mean to say that one is better than the other, or better off or not better off or whatever. It's just the way society works. I don't know if I'm hitting, who was the intersectionality question? What did you really want out of that question?
Your perspective
On what was taking place?
on your experience with it as a woman of color, a woman with a disability. How has intersectionality impacted your career?
Yeah.
And your, views on moving forward?
It never leaves. To this day, I just had an event, a community event in Truro, and we honored, we did plaques. Your president has the brochure, I'm so proud of it, where we looked at Black women educators who have been erased from history and put up plaques in honor. And I was at first the only person of color with a whole white group it's called the Nova Scotia Women's Historical Society. Love the people, but at the same time, we operate different. We have different views, and you get into little tiffs along the way. You don't understand me. You don't understand. One of the things I didn't win in that fight, which we did really good working it through, and you wouldn't believe what it was. I wanted a cake at the function, and they didn't think we should have a cake. I didn't win that battle. They wanted to offer a cake and have it at the meeting later, but they didn't get what the celebration of having that cake would do in the community. So, like I said, I didn't win. I didn't win that, but I could never have helped with the changes in the trade union movement that we did without the support of those other groups. It could not happen. How can one person carry a vote? You can't, and then you would have men too that would join with what we were doing. Like, couldn't do it alone. It's not possible. So you gotta if you don't make those connections, you'll move very little in the movement. Plus, everything's based on the vote. Like, you don't get a convention and have consensus. So, you got to play those systems. I would know the rules of order upside down and inside out. Not because I liked them, but I had to use them. They were a weapon used against me. So I had to learn it, and I didn't want to use it against others, though. I had to know why I needed to know those rules of order. I'm going to switch to the Heritage Collection. I don't want to because I got so many things in that union to tell you. But on the agenda it says newspaper clippings. Like I said, my eyes are bothering me a little bit, and I can't see. And these are the collection. I wish you all could go see the collection. It's now the property, it's not mine anymore, of St. Mary's University. It's the most used collection that the university has. I'm so proud. And more people travel from across the country because nobody saved our history. And I thought once everything in the world became computerized, it would be no good, but it is, because you have to know what to look for. These things were destroyed. So that collection, I'm so proud of how people have used the collection. So you should all, we get a lot of school children that use it, and people writing their theses on things in the collection. The trade union, there's a big trade union thing being written, like I said, as we speak. I at one point faced so much discrimination in the union, much as I love the union, but I'm allowed to say that we in the Canada Employment and Immigration Union, there's a group of us that it was very male-dominated, and we ended up complaining about the racism in that component. And it went to the board of directors of the PSAC, because as you know, we're just a component. The executive committee 100% ruled that we had valid reasons. They were sexist, racist, everything you want to say. It then went to this is how many layers, an independent inquiry. The independent inquiry claimed 100% that the president was guilty in that union and should have the maximum penalty under the union rules and should be removed. It then went to the board of directors. This is how many, like you can't. Went to the board of directors. The board of directors is all of the heads of your unions, your components, and they were afraid and said that we not saying that he's guilty or is not guilty because this is too dangerous for the union. And if this gets out, then they could end up decertifying the whole PSAC. We said our goal is not to decertify. We're trade unionists. Our goal is to stop the discrimination. And as a result, they did nothing, and the members were behind us. The board would not take it to convention because they knew the members were behind us, and it ended up we alone had to take it to court. There's a group of us that took, and off our own dime, and we made it to the Federal Court of Canada, and we're headed for the Supreme Court. We asked the union, would they not penalize this at the step before so we could make it to the Supreme Court? They wouldn't agree, so we had to fold because we could have lost house, home, everything else. I said, that's it for me. So it didn't happen. And as a result, we got what they call nowadays the gag order, or it has another name. What is it? Yes. Speak loud. Non-disclosure agreement. So I saved every single solitary paper. There's not a paper I didn't save. I'm a collector. So somebody was going through the collection and couldn't believe that I would have saved all these things, and they're writing it. And what I learned was that they said, Lynn, you guys could never have won. I'm like, what do you mean? We were fighting. He said, it's amazing what you did, but because of the structure of the union, it was not possible for you to have won that, which I had tears coming down my eyes, because when you're in the middle of something, you don't see it. You're just fighting for your rights. And so that's what we ended up doing. So I'm proud of that struggle, but what it meant was that I was, at that time, the first person of color on the Canadian Labour Congress. That's another story of how I ran for that position and was the only black person and the first black person ever in the history of the Canadian Labour Congress. But because my union would not support me as a trade unionist on the CLC, I had no funding, no whatever, so I had to leave. So I never got to go any further in the Canadian Labour Congress because the PSAC. CLC said, we want her, we're doing it, but it wasn't their decision to do that. The barriers. I think I've touched on many barriers. For example, on the CLC, I was the chair of Workers of Color Network. You can still get, and this committee should have, the Workers of Color document that we get, the Anti-Racism Task Force report. Have you had that from the CLC? We went across the country. It's the only time we looked at unions as unions all over the country on terms of racism and the community, and that culminated in being the Anti-Racism Task Force report, in which you can go to the CLC and get that. And it has barriers from all the members. It was amazing, the input and the recommendations, which most probably have never been fulfilled, and we promised the people it wouldn't sit on the shelves. But we did it. It's beautiful bound copies, has all the different areas where we need to deal with these things, but it's still there. Imposter syndrome, I think you mean people that, too, feel like they're fighting, for example, for women's rights, but they're not really into it. They're just trying to move up the ladder or something.
No, more so not feeling that you belong in that leadership pool as a woman, right? So oftentimes it's male voices
Yeah. And the only way that that's going to happen is you need to get, my goal throughout the trade union movement was to get more people at the table. Everything that I did was, we got to have committees to get more people. We've got to get more people because one person, even within the women, at one time, believe it or not, in the national executive, we did end up, we used to call it the right and the left, and we were on the left and the rest were on the right. And the left did end up winning. And we did, just by targeting people to come and join and speak up and develop. Training, oh my gosh, the union is the best place in the world at that time anyway to get training. The problem was we weren't training those people in the locals that needed to get trained, like, the workers of color, the indigenous people and what have you, they weren't getting trained. And plus, they didn't feel like it was any place for them. Nova Scotia actually held the first conference for Indigenous people and people of color. Never heard of it in my time. We organized it. Never happened before. We had full house of all the people. They couldn't believe it. They loved it. They all were joining the union because they thought the union was wonderful, like the conference, but it wasn't. We lost them along the way, but at least for the moment. At least for the moment we had them. I think my time is up because I didn't get to do all the articles but you'll be able to keep to see some of the, like going to South Africa and Nelson Mandela. The union was an observer when Nelson Mandela, so I got to go there and all the, one last thing, my time is up, I know, I'm not going to go off like your president does. I got more quotes. One thing the union needs to do and was very successful in Halifax was the occupation. Everybody usually when I talk from here wants to hear about the occupation of the Canada Employment Centre here in Halifax. And we have the privilege of being the longest occupation of a federal government department in the history of Canada to this day. And we occupied, it was for 133 days straight, and we couldn't have done it without joining up with the local community, plus the union. Union had funds, like the community doesn't have a lot of, the union puts in some funds and some initiatives. The community knows their community. They want an employment office in their community. And it was in the poorest part of the city, and we won just by those. So I'll stop there. How'd I do?
Thank you so much, Dr. Lynn.
I kept within the time?
Yeah, that's good. So we're going to have a period of questions, so 30 minutes for you to question Dr. Lynn. So on va continuer, je vais le dire en français. Vous allez avoir une période de 30 minutes pour poser vos questions à Dr. Lynn. Pour les francophones, sentez-vous bien à l'aise? On a l'outil de traduction que je vais pouvoir remettre à Dr. Lynn si vos questions sont en français. Hyper important, please speak in the mic for your question, like that everybody will understand what you say because the translator cannot hear you when you don't have the mic. So for our French person, they won't hear you if you speak in English, and the opposite will be the same. Donc pour les personnes qui parlent en français aussi, s'il vous plaît, utilisez les micros, comme ça nos collègues anglophones vont pouvoir se faire traduire vos questions. Puis Dr. Lynn aussi, très important parce que dans les boîtes de traduction, on ne vous entend pas si vous ne parlez pas dans les micros. I'm going to leave. For the French question.
Oh, okay. You have to show me how this one.
Oh, it's already set. You just have to put the earphone. If they are talking in French, the translator will translate for you.
Okay, thank you. You know, if there's one thing I do not like, it's when I go to these events and nobody asks questions.
What is your opinion on this discourse around the term woke? Because to me, woke is just people who don't like inclusivity, people who don't like diversity, people who don't necessarily think that everybody should be included or offered a seat at the table.
I'm not that familiar. I've heard the term, but it wasn't in my time. It's after my time, so I don't think I can make things up. I have the saying that my brother has bullshit baffles brains. I don't know if you heard. So I don't feel qualified to really answer. Can you answer it for me again? Yeah.
How do I answer it for you?
Go again. What exactly does woke, what is woke doing to the discussion?
I feel like it's being weaponized by people who don't believe in diversity. They're using it almost as a catch-all, almost meant as like a slur towards people who believe that everybody should have a seat at the table. People should have voices, that every human is valid, and they're using it as an opportunity or a way to kind of try to belittle or diminish another person's contribution.
Can you do it in a sentence?
Like call someone
I'll
woke?
put you to work.
I'm not getting paid right now.
I love it.
Okay. I mean, like, people will say, it's woke to have a conference like this because why should equity matter? Why should diversity matter? A really good example is if we look at our neighbors to the south, and they are actively campaigning against diversity,
for
equity,
sure.
and inclusion, and they're wanting diversity, equity, and inclusion within our society as woke ideology, when really it's just being a human,
Right.
in my opinion.
Right. That was excellent. How much does she get paid? Zero. Thank you for that.
You have done a lot over your career.
Where's the
and-
person? Oh, okay.
And I just wanted to know if there's one thing in particular that stood out to you the most.
One thing that stood out, oh, you're not going to believe this, because it's so simple. I had decided to seek federal office in the election. I think it was in '93. And the reason for that is because no one had done it, nobody had done it before, and that someone had to at least open the door, knowing that it wasn't going to win. But, I mean, that's a terrible way to go into it, but, I mean, what are the chances? And one of the most amazing things for me was how the community, and the marginalized community, who had never really participated much, how they rallied around trying to get me elected. But more importantly was the day that I went in the area of social housing in the community. It was the social housing area. And the little kids in the community all started running towards me. And they were yelling, "It's Lynn Jones, it's Lynn Jones. We're voting for you." And they were so elated. And I thought, and I'll never forget it, never. And I thought, what I'm doing is not for naught. Like, if little kids see a vision and see something to that extent in what it is that's happening, then it's good. Like, I feel good. I'm on the right track. And that's something I'll never, and that was in '93. So I know you thought it was going to be some big whatever, but really it was I became somehow a vision, a hope for those children. So that was important.
Thank you so much for being here, first off. If you could give one piece of advice, there's advice you've received or something you've learned over the years to people starting out in the union, what would that be?
Oh, gosh, I could give so many. But this is crazy thing that I use, and I pass on too, that I talk to people about, because I remember in doing these, most of the time, you've never done it before, it's all new. Anybody that tells you is not scared, it makes me wonder about them. Like, you're nervous, you have to get over that nervous. You were nervous too, weren't you? Yeah, you're nervous and what have you. And then sometimes you talk about women, you'd get at the table and nobody seemed to listen, nobody heard you, and they'd move on. And it was a friend of mine who said, Lynn, one of the reasons is that your brain works very quickly. Doesn't necessarily work smartly, but it works very quickly. And sometimes you're far ahead when you go at those tables. And sometimes, and I find this, believe it or not, all due respect to the men, the women, for some reason, they're because they do so much multitasking and what have you, their brain is working, and you don't realize, it's not that people are against you or anything, they just haven't caught up. And what that person taught me, which is a big lesson, and it's worked, believe it or not, is that you got to give them time to catch up. And how you do that is that never come out and ask for anything. I'll give you an example. I want a human rights committee. Don't come out and ask and say, I need a human rights committee. It's kind of like the whereases, instead of, going straight to therefore be it resolved, right? So when you're dealing at these tables, do all the whereases and make them as long as you want for them to catch up to you. Whereas, like, you don't use that terminology. But that was one of the best lessons. Even the first time I used it, it worked. It's like, like, I really got to work this thing for them before they catch up to what it is that I really want. And they're more like, there's some heads nodding. Has anybody tried that or recognized that? Can you say something? No, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I understand exactly as soon as you said that, because if you have an idea in your mind where you want a group to go, and you feel that they're not catching up, I say things like, well, what do you think would be a good idea to do such and such, even though that such and such is what I want to do? And then they come up with an idea and they'll say, you know what? That's a great idea. And let it be their idea. Mm-hmm. Your idea has to become their idea. And then when they see that idea, then they'll want to do it. It's the same with trying to gather volunteers, I find. You don't say, who will help me set the table? You say, you know what? You're really good at setting the table. Could you come about 10 minutes early and help me do such and such? Then that way you're projecting onto them a skill that you've seen in them, and then you want to draw it out. So it's just kind of like the same idea. Yes. You don't wait for a volunteer. Mm-hmm. No one will ever volunteer. Mm-hmm. And it's the same, and if I could just for a second say, I appreciate when you talked about, you ran for things, not necessarily even wanting to win it. Like you just wanted the experience of running for something. I think that was really pivotal for me because I kind of did the same thing when I ran for the local president the first time. I didn't think I was going to win. I just ran for fun. Like, it was just like, well, no one else is running, and okay, I will. But then someone else did. And I thought, oh, well, now what do I do? Back down? Because that's a nice person. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just let my name stand, and I won't win it anyway because they have more experience. They'll win it. I'll just sit back. But then I won.
Exactly.
And then that's what got me involved. So I thank you for your stories, because I think that I've learned so much in this, last couple of minutes here. So thank you.
Thank you, because that was really great. It reminds me, I see your hand over there, over this side. But one of how I became a president of the Canadian Labour Congress, I went to the convention for the very first time in my life. I was blown away by the number of how many people go to the CLC convention. It was like way, way, way more than PSAC. And there was an opening for the vice president position. Again, I said, okay, I'll just run. I didn't know anybody. I know 2 people in that whole convention. 2. And I said, okay, the position's open. I need the experience of running for this position. So a little bit of something else happened. 2 big unions, CAW, Canadian Auto Workers, and CUPE, had their candidates, which they had the most people at convention. But they got in a fight. And they started fighting with each other over who should win and who should take the position and whatever. And I'm just sitting back, waiting. So then by the time I ran, I'm just little old Lynn moving up to and doing my thing. And what happened was I literally went up the middle, because each side got upset with each other and ended up, they voted for me. And that's how I became vice president of the Canadian Labour Congress. And I'm like, oh, never know. Yes.
Good? Can we hear? Okay, perfect. I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience. I'll be honest, like I've never heard of you other than from today, so I'm happy that I was able to be here and listen to you speak. It was very informative and everything. So I just want to say thank you, and for not giving up, and despite all of the things that you have gone through, thank you for always moving forward. Okay. That being said, what is your biggest accomplishment, I guess, that you've had throughout your whole experience? Thanks.
That's quite a question. And I guess thank you so much. And I'm not surprised that you don't hear of me, because the trade union movement is not very good at all at the history, particularly for marginalized people. We don't get written. Our stories don't get told. And so it's the same old, same old. So it's up to you, who are there now, to look at I'm doing it in the community. Remember I said had the project on Friday on women educators. So it's all this thing about erasure. It's not there. But as to your question, what was it? What was the biggest? Or? Yeah, let's say your biggest accomplishment. And I every little I wouldn't say that there is. I think they're all. I mean, it sounds like a stacked answer. All the biggest accomplishments, but I can have something that looks like it's so minute, but to me is the biggest thing that ever happened. For example, I was really proud once we had the union train, very active in the church, in the Baptist churches. A lot of black people in Nova Scotia, very active in their churches. It's part of their history. But they didn't have the funding and things to even get, you know how you get a union bag or folder and all these different things, or to be able to go away to a nice retreat and like you have here, and was able to get we put on this course called Community Union and Social Action. And it was amazing. And I was pleased. Like, it was a big thing because it was just a few people, not even half, probably this side of the room, the number of people. But the union funded the executive of the church to go away for the weekend. And we looked at what we have in common. So we would say, okay, in the Bible says this about social justice. The union says this about social justice. And they looked almost exactly the same. And we were able to spend a whole weekend together that they had never done before. I doubt if it's ever been done before then or since then. But the traction that the union got from working with that church was unbelievable, because it was before the occupation too. So when we had the occupation, the union was there, the church was there. We had formed a community that helped each other. So any initiatives where I am able to help the trade union understand that the issues in the community are the same issues as it's in the trade union movement, and get them together, those are the ones that, but you fight. When you talk about racism, for example, the union would say, it's not a bread and butter issue, so why do we have, for example, equity conferences? It's not bread and butter. They don't make the connection. So my best initiatives are when we've made the connection between community and trade union, and that we need to do it together.
What a nice group we are, and we
One
have
last
10
one.
minutes left, so we're going to take one last question. Donc, on est vraiment un très beau groupe, beaucoup de questions, c'est plaisant. Il nous reste 10 minutes avec Dr. Lynn, donc on va prendre une dernière question. Merci.
Hello. My question is, because I know that most of us activists have had times, and I know I've had multiple times where you just get really low. And you just, you just kind of say, well, like, what am I doing? What's the point? You feel like you're walking in mud. And I'm just wondering, because I know you've reached those points, but what did you reach for to keep yourself going?
My faith. My faith that there can be a better world, and that we can all reach these points. I have to tell you, I know time. I have to tell you, I just went through a horrible situation with Air Canada. I was trying to get to New York, to the United Nations thing in New York, and Air Canada totally messed up, and they didn't have the proper equipment. I was supposed to go straight to New York. They changed my flight because they didn't have the proper plane or equipment to Montreal, and then it didn't work. But anyway, it was just horrible. It killed my body. It killed everything. They couldn't get me off the plane in Montreal because they didn't have the proper lifts and things. So they had to send for they had the people that operate the lift trying to get me out. They couldn't get me out. No, it was so painful. Then they sent for another group, but eventually they sent for the fire department. I'm serious, the fire department. And these big, burly, heavy, white men get on the plane to try to get me out of the seat and down the aisle. But the lift won't take it, and I can't walk. So therefore, they're now going to, I had one fireman in front of me, facing me, trying to, because they couldn't, I still had to, I was around row 15, to help me up the aisle, and one fireman behind me to try to keep me up, because the only way they could do it, remember, I have no wheelchair doesn't fit there. it was just awful. But those firemen, if I were to just look at them, I'm thinking to myself, they're probably the type of people that are your right wing. Don't ask me why. Don't even go there. White wing racists here. They got this big black woman that they're going to have to hold on tight. Their bodies tight against mine in the front and in the back. And one fireman has to go to the floor because I can't move my legs. He lays flat on the floor trying to push one leg as we're going up the aisle to try to get me up the aisle. And the other fireman says, look, you can do it. The one up top, you can do it. He said, you're doing so well. You could do it. And guess what? When we make it through, I'm taking you over to lunch. That's what he says. A long time later, because you wouldn't believe the story of me getting off this plane and up the aisle. And when I did finally get off the ramp of the plane and onto my wheelchair, I turned, because everybody's standing around, it's quite a story, and I look up and I see that fireman. I said, what time's lunch? But what it taught me was that those firemen, honestly, they had no thought of, I'm going right now, seriously I am, no thought about racism, difference of color, nothing. The only thing they wanted was to do their job and help me to the best of their ability, based on their job, to get off of this plane. And what that taught me was that there can be a better world. We need to keep fighting because we can overcome all these different barriers and what have you. We just need to work more together and keep at it. And yes, you'll get discouraged, but there is a better time and a better day. And I send a thank you to Air Canada for the firemen because they were beautiful. So that's my
So I'd like to thank you so much for coming. A gift bag that you love. Yes, thank you so much for sharing your story and coming and visiting with us. I'm sure everybody really appreciated everything and for taking the questions. I know that's not always easy, but thank you so much. So let's give her a good hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.